Are you a boy or a girl?
I am definitely a girl. Like, that's all I consider myself as.
Do people treat you differently when they know you're transgender?
Yes, they do.
Celebrated for her strength, courage, and visibility, Jazz Jennings seemed to have it all out together. A loving family, a hit reality show, and the courage to live your truth in front of the whole world, right from the young age of 2.
They don't understand what the concept means. They think that I'm weird, that I shouldn't have the same rights as them just because of what's between my legs.
But behind the bright smiles and TV cameras, there's a side to her life many never got to see. A side filled with quiet pain, hard choices, and battles that didn't make the headlines. What really happened to Jazz? Why is her story leaving so many people stunned? Stay tuned to find out this truth that is far from your imagination. From the moment Jazz Jennings appeared on national television at age 6, she opened a door that many people had never seen before. Born as a male, Jazz knew deep inside that she was a girl. With the support of her parents, she began living openly as a transgender girl. At the time, this was rarely seen in public, especially from someone so young. As she got older, Jazz's life wasn't just hers anymore. In 2015, her reality show, I Am Jazz, premiered on TLC, giving millions of viewers a window into her experiences. It covered everything from school and friendships to hormone therapy and her gender confirmation surgery. Many people praised her for her bravery and honesty. She became a role model and a voice for young transgender people everywhere. But at the same time, her life became very public. Every joy, every struggle, every change wasn't a thing of privacy anymore. Jazz also worked with doctors, gave speeches, wrote books, and stood up for transgender rights. She helped others feel strong enough to do what they believed was best for themselves. Her family, especially her parents, Jeanette and Greg, stood by her through everything. They protected her as best they could, even when criticism came in from people who didn't understand or accept her identity. But life under a spotlight is never easy, especially for someone still growing up. Jazz had to deal with personal growth, mental health, social pressure, body changes, and medical decisions, all with cameras following her. It wasn't just a show. It was her real life unfolding on national television. As the years passed, the challenges became more intense. She graduated high school with honors and was accepted into Harvard University, a moment many fans celebrated. But shortly after that, Jazz shocked everyone by announcing that she would be delaying college. She said she needed time to focus on her mental health. That was the first public sign that not everything was okay. Behind the scenes, Jazz was dealing with things far deeper than anyone knew. Between managing the expectations of her public image and facing the private struggles that came with her journey, Jazz reached a point where the pressure became too much. She began to gain weight rapidly. She lost motivation. She started questioning things she had once been so sure about. But what really pushed Jazz to that breaking point? What was the weight she had been silently carrying for so long? Hang on, 'cause what you're about to find out will leave you stunned. The untold tragedy. In June 2018, at just 17, Jazz underwent gender confirmation surgery. For many transgender individuals, this is a deeply personal and affirming step. For Jazz, it was supposed to be the beginning of true freedom in her body. But the moment she came out of that operating room, the reality was already spiraling. The surgery, according to her own words, didn't go as planned. Things did come apart, she said in a later interview. Though she stressed the complications were cosmetic and not life-threatening, the truth was heavier than she let on. The aftermath was wild. She had to undergo a second procedure not long after. then a third in 2019. Each time, Jazz tried to stay positive. Each time, she reassured the world she was happy with the results. But healing from gender confirmation surgery is already physically and emotionally grueling. Having to do it over and over is something most people can't even imagine. Some critics online went as far as to call the process mutilation. A now infamous post from Spiked magazine described her as sexless, sterilized, and physically mutilated, fueling harsh debates online. The claim that part of her colon had to be used to create a due to complications sent shockwaves across social media. But here's the thing. Jazz has never confirmed those claims, and outside of her own public remarks, no medical documentation exists to support them. Still, the damage had been done, not just physically but to her public image and emotional state. A moment meant to affirm her identity ended up becoming the centerpiece of both praise and public speculation. This left her vulnerable and raw. While some online voices painted her surgeries as botched or unethical, Jazz tried to hold her head high. But even strength has limits, especially when paired with trauma. But if there's one tragedy that weighed her down completely, it was the war going on in her own mind. Years after her surgery, Jazz began speaking openly about something even more harrowing than recovery: her unraveling mental health. In Season 7 of I Am Jazz, 2021, audiences watched as she emotionally revealed her spiral into binge eating and depression. Within a short time, she gained nearly 100 pounds, admitting that food had become her coping mechanism. She described the feeling as losing control, and this wasn't just limited to her body, but her thoughts, emotions, and identity. She struggled with anxiety, battled depressive episodes, and lived in a constant tug-of-war with herself. And all of this came right before one of the most critical chapters of her life: the period where she began attending Harvard University. The contrast was jarring. The girl who had been on magazine covers, praised in books, and featured on national talk shows was now documenting her descent into emotional chaos. Her pain wasn't glamorous. It wasn't filtered. And the worst part, it was far from over. Some critics pointed fingers at the early medical interventions she received, claiming that her mental health struggles were a direct result of transitioning so young. But Jazz herself dismissed that narrative. She has always been clear. Her emotional battles are not because of her transition, but rather a result of societal pressures, relentless public judgment, and the weight of constantly having to prove her worth. In 2024, she publicly shared her journey of losing 70 pounds and working toward recovery. But no weight loss, no positive spin, no Instagram update could erase the years she spent drowning in silence. However, even worse happenings were yet to unravel. Being a public figure comes with attention, some of it flattering, some of it cruel. For Jazz Jennings, it came with something far more terrifying. It came with death threats. In 2023, during the Season 8 finale of I Am Jazz, the curtain was pulled back on a reality that had been haunting her for years. In one chilling scene, she revealed that while at Harvard, she received a death threat. But this wasn't a vague online comment. It was personal. The person knew her dorm location. The fear in her voice was palpable as she described how terrifying it was to realize that she wasn't just being targeted online anymore. Even her real life was no longer safe. Her entire family, who had supported her from the beginning, now had to live in heightened fear. These issues that stem from such advocacy are barely talked about. Beyond the applause and the awards, just the anxiety of walking to your dorm bathroom and wondering who might be watching is threatening. And this is what Jazz has to deal with. Jazz has long been the face of trans representation in America. Her book, I Am Jazz, co-authored with Jessica Herthel, was meant to open hearts and minds. It aimed to help children and families understand what being transgender really means. But the backlash to that book was fierce. In fact, I Am Jazz became one of the most banned books in the United States. School boards, lawmakers, and angry parents labeled it dangerous. Some even accused it of brainwashing children. The irony was suffocating. A book meant to save young lives was being treated like a threat. Despite the rising censorship, Jazz has never backed down. She's insisted, again and again, that her goal is not to convert anyone. It's to create space for understanding, compassion, and education. But that hasn't stopped the storm. And storms, as we know, don't always just pass. But who is Jazz, and why the backlash? Let's dive into the backstory of Jazz Jennings. From childhood visibility to global influence. In 2007, at just 6 years old, Jazz made her first major public appearance. On ABC 2020 with Barbara Walters, she openly shared her transgender identity. The interview marked her as one of the youngest publicly visible transgender individuals ever. Her confidence and clarity, even at that young age, surprised many. It showed that Jazz understood who she was, and she was ready to teach others too. Following that, she appeared on The Rosie Show, in another Barbara Walters segment, and later in the Oprah Winfrey Network documentary, I Am Jazz, A Family in Transition in 2011. Each time, she spoke with honesty and heart, making her story feel accessible and real. In 2013, Jazz and her parents founded the Trans Kids Purple Rainbow Foundation. It began as a small support group for transgender youth, aiming to offer resources, community, and hope. That same year, Jazz founded Purple Rainbow Tales, a small business she used to raise funds by selling custom mermaid tales and sharing playful videos online. In 2014, Jazz co-authored a children's picture book called I Am Jazz with Jessica Herthel. The book drew on her own experience and spoke gently to children and families about transgender identity. It won recognition from libraries and educators, and although it later became one of the most controversial titles in schools, it also became one of the most important voices in children's literature about gender diversity. In 2016, she released Being Jazz, My Life as a Transgender Teen, her memoir aimed at older readers. The book explored her inner growth, her family's love, and the meaning of identity. Jazz's visibility expanded further in 2015 when TLC premiered her reality series I Am Jazz. The show followed her daily life, from school and puberty to friendships and family challenges. It became widely watched and ran for 8 seasons, ending in early 2023. It allowed millions to see that her life was not about drama. It was about growth, truth, and the ordinary joys of being a teenager with extra understanding. That same year, she became a national spokeswoman, partnering with Clean and Clear on the See the Real Me campaign. She also modeled for the NOH8 anti-discrimination campaign, bringing a transgender voice into mainstream skincare and empowerment efforts. And talking about the recognition she's gotten so far, it's more than just mind-blowing. It's dazzling. Jazz has received many awards and titles, often breaking records for her age. In 2014, Time named her one of the 25 most influential teens. She also became the youngest person ever listed in Out magazine's Out 100, in the Advocate's 40 Under 40, and in the Trans 100 list. She was named a Youth Trailblazer by Logo TV and was a youth ambassador for the Human Rights Campaign. In 2016, she was selected as the Grand Marshal for the New York City Pride Parade. That same year, she spoke at the American Library Association's annual conference, helping librarians understand transgender youth and the importance of representation in books. In 2018, Equality Illinois honored her with a Spotlight Award to recognize her influence in LGBTQ civil rights. In 2024, at the Gilead Media Awards, she took the stage to deliver a speech about supporting young transgender people. Her words lifted thousands in the audience and online. She was also among those honored by the Human Rights Campaign at the Time to Thrive conference with an Upstander Award for her continued advocacy work. Jazz also expanded her influence through film, voice work, and design. In 2017, the Tunner Doll Company created the first doll to be marketed as transgender, modeled after her, helping young children see themselves in the toys they play with. She served as a voice actor for the transgender teenage character Zadie in Danger and Eggs, an animated series set at a Pride event. It was one role she described as groundbreaking and meaningful. In 2019, she starred in the short film Denim, about a trans teen navigating the fallout after a bathroom photo is leaked online. The film premiered on Amazon Prime Video, showing again how her real life and fictional stories could build empathy and change perceptions. More so, Jazz used social media to connect directly with young people from early on. She ran a YouTube channel called I Am Jazz, where she posted vlogs, question and answer sessions, DIY tutorials, and personal reflections. She gained tens of thousands of subscribers and grew her platform beyond television. She shared the ups and downs of life, including her transition journey, advocacy work, and creative projects. On Instagram, she has over 1 million followers as of mid-2025, often posting about her art and film studies at Harvard, her daily life, milestones with her siblings and friends, and reflections on growth and identity. Her social media presence feels personal, warm, and real. Regarding her formal education, Jazz was accepted to Harvard University to study art, film, and visual studies. She deferred enrollment at first, prioritizing her health and well-being, but eventually began classes around 2022. By spring 2025, she was photographed on campus enjoying senior spring, studying with friends and celebrating what she described as a magical college journey. Through her books, speeches, show, foundation, and public presence, Jazz has influenced not just public opinion, but policy and hearts. She helped change U.S. Soccer Federation policy, paving the way for transgender youth to play sports as their true selves. She educated librarians, readers, and families about the importance of representation, and her lifetime of visibility has saved and shaped young lives. When Jazz speaks, people listen. She often reminds others to see gender-diverse youth as children first, not as political arguments. Her work continues through her foundation and social media, helping families feel seen and youth feel empowered. As of mid-2025, Jazz lives in Florida with her family when not on campus and remains close to her siblings. She continues posting updates from Harvard, studio space, gallery visits, and everyday moments that remind her followers that life after fame is still beautiful and meaningful. And as beautiful and put together as she seems to be, the critics and social challenges she faced hits harder than the recognitions. Let's take a look. The criticism she couldn't escape. From the moment Jazz first appeared on national television to discuss her identity as a transgender girl, her life was scrutinized. And it wasn't just by the general public, but also by critics, medical professionals, social commentators, and politicians. Jazz's early transition has been one of the most hotly contested aspects of her story. Critics argue that transitioning at age 5 was simply too young. Her use of puberty blockers at age 11 was also placed under heavy fire by those who believe children cannot comprehend the long-term implications of medical interventions. Conservative outlets, particularly Spiked, opined that Jazz had been used as a political symbol rather than protected as a child. Online commentators on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, have circulated clips of her from I Am Jazz, juxtaposing emotional scenes with harsh captions accusing her parents and doctors of recklessness. Some argue that children should not be allowed to make irreversible decisions about their bodies, citing Jazz's complications from gender affirmation surgeries as evidence that her medical path was premature. To many of these critics, Jazz's story became less about her personal journey and more of a lightning rod in the debate over trans healthcare for minors. This turned a real teenager's life into a kind of battleground. Every setback, every expression of sadness, every surgery complication was weaponized as proof that transitioning was a mistake. Another frequent theme among critics is the role of Jazz's parents, particularly her mother, Jeanette. Many accuse them of pushing an agenda or forcing Jazz into transitioning too early. Detractors claim that her mother's activism, outspoken, passionate, and often emotional, had crossed a line into exploitation. Some online critics dissect moments from the I Am Jazz show, interpreting Jeanette's tearful or frustrated responses as controlling. For instance, a moment when Jazz appears uncomfortable discussing dating was used by detractors to suggest she was pressured into showcasing aspects of her personal life for a cause that was no longer hers to carry. The show's production itself has been criticized by those who believe it blurred the line between education and reality TV. Unlike a private medical journey, Jazz's experience was carefully edited and aired on national television for millions to see. Critics have asked, was this really the best environment for a child dealing with deep personal transitions? Supporters argue that Jeanette and Jazz Jennings were simply doing what any loving parents would do, listening to their child's repeated insistence that she was a girl and responding with affirmation. Yet critics insist that even the most well-meaning parent cannot possibly predict how a prepubescent child will feel about their identity years down the line. But those are even the least of these criticisms. A focal point for critics has been Jazz's gender confirmation surgery, particularly the complications that followed. Jazz underwent vaginoplasty at age 17, and multiple surgeries were required to address complications. While her medical team noted that complications are not uncommon, critics took this as validation that she was rushed into surgery before her body was ready. Online, clips of Jazz's post-surgery struggles were lifted out of context and circulated to bolster anti-transition rhetoric. A particularly sensitive scene, where Jazz emotionally admits to binge eating and feeling disconnected from herself, was widely shared, with some captions claiming this as proof that gender-affirming care leads to long-term harm. Medical professionals who advocate for trans healthcare have rebutted this narrative, arguing that the risks Jazz faced were known and discussed beforehand. But in public forums, especially on social media, these rebuttals were drowned out by alarmist voices. For every article that approached her situation with compassion and nuance, there were dozens of viral posts framing her journey as a cautionary tale. Even her romantic life wasn't left out. Jazz's romantic life, or better still, lack thereof, has been a sensitive subject, both for her personally and in public commentary. In Season 8 of I Am Jazz, she spoke candidly about how she hadn't dated in 4 years and struggled with social anxiety. Critics interpreted this as further evidence that she was suffering silently and that the medical path she took had alienated her from her peers. Some commentators questioned whether her openness about anxiety, depression, and disordered eating were symptoms of regret or internal conflict. However, these interpretations ignored the reality that many cisgender teens experience similar mental health struggles, especially those living under a spotlight. Still, in the age of viral clips and quick judgments, nuance was lost. Jazz's momentary confessions became permanent proof points in the minds of those who already doubted her journey. Even down to her education, these critics had no limits. Jazz's admission to Harvard was widely celebrated in mainstream media, but her critics viewed it differently. Some questioned whether her fame and platform contributed to her acceptance, while others wondered if the stress of such an elite academic environment would exacerbate her existing emotional strain. While attending Harvard, Jazz revealed that she often felt isolated and overwhelmed. These feelings, critics claimed, reflected the deeper psychological toll of her transition and public visibility. A few even speculated that her choice to step back from advocacy work was a sign she was distancing herself from the movement she once represented. However, this interpretation fails to recognize the natural evolution of any young adult, particularly one who spent over a decade as a spokesperson for a community. Wanting to grow privately isn't necessarily rejection, it could just be a sign of human exhaustion. Still, critics clung to this phase in her life as part of a larger argument. And just as you guessed, they emphasized on the fact that her early transition and lifelong advocacy came at the cost of normal development. Perhaps the most damaging form of criticism Jazz Jennings faced was the tendency to treat her not as a person, but as a symbol. Critics from both sides of the political spectrum placed enormous pressure on her to either prove or disprove the legitimacy of transitioning youth. To her detractors, Jazz was a failed experiment, a cautionary tale, or a victim of an overzealous movement. To her supporters, she was a trailblazer, a hero, or an icon. But what was often lost in both narratives was the fact that she was a teenager. She was still a person with emotions, struggles, contradictions, and vulnerabilities. Social media, cable news, think pieces, and YouTube channels debated her existence like it was an abstract thought experiment. Jazz didn't ask to be the face of transgender youth. The world decided that for her. And once that happened, every aspect of her life became a Rorschach test for society's beliefs about gender, youth, medicine, and morality. Jazz herself has spoken about the emotional strain of being a public figure. The expectations placed on her from within the LGBTQ+ community and outside of it have been immense. She's had to balance advocacy with personal identity, growth with responsibility, and authenticity with performance. While she's never outright rejected her role in the public eye, it's clear that being watched and judged since early childhood has shaped her psychology. In one episode of I Am Jazz, she openly weeps during a therapy session, expressing how she often feels like she has to be perfect for everyone. That kind of pressure, magnified by the microscope of criticism, takes a toll. But instead of being met with empathy, those vulnerable moments often became ammunition for those seeking to discredit her journey. Her resilience. Despite the strong opposition, Jazz Jennings continues to be one of the most visible and influential transgender voices of her generation. Her life, often lived under the lens of public attention, has shifted from simply telling a story to embodying strength, resilience, and evolution. In 2024, she made a major personal update, a visible weight loss, and a renewed commitment to her well-being. And beyond a physical transformation, it was a public affirmation of growth. The most beautiful thing about Jazz is the way she's owned her experiences and redefined herself along the way. Rather than framing her journey as one of victimhood, Jazz actively steers the conversation toward empowerment. She's candid about her struggles, whether with self-image, anxiety, or emotional exhaustion, but would always loop the conversation back to healing, and hope. Her recent updates had shown that setbacks don't define her. She consistently highlights the lessons learned, the people she's helped, and the inner peace she continues to chase. Her ability to stand tall amid chaos without allowing the noise to dim her light is noteworthy. And her supporters? Oh, they have been her strength. These people have rallied behind her, displaying their strong support, celebrating her courage and clarity in a world that often misunderstands trans experiences. These supporters do not see a controversial figure, but a determined one. They recognize her willingness to be vulnerable as a form of leadership, and in doing so, they elevate her beyond headlines. Jazz has, in many ways, grown in parallel with the conversation around transgender rights. Where once she may have been viewed as a novelty or anomaly, she now stands as part of a broader and growing movement of people simply demanding to be seen and respected for who they are. Her ongoing activism is not just about visibility, it's about representation with purpose. In interviews and personal updates, Jazz often emphasizes the power of self-love. This is even more potent when set against her 2024 update, where her personal transformation wasn't shared for applause, but as an honest reflection of where she was and where she was going. Her supporters understood the deeper message. Healing isn't linear, and that caring for yourself is an act of revolution when the world expects you to fall apart. So whether it's returning to public speaking, continuing her education, or simply showing up authentically, she reminds others that living in truth is more powerful than any criticism. What resonates with people isn't perfection, but her consistent effort to be real. That's what makes her advocacy stick. That's what makes it matter. While the media might often highlight controversy, Jazz doesn't dwell there. Her energy goes into community building, personal growth, and amplifying underrepresented voices. From publishing books to speaking at major events, she proves that being visible isn't just about being known or famous. It's about showing others what's possible. Her platform is not one to be used for self-defense. She has used it to shape the world she wants to live in. What many admire most about Jazz is her ability to balance vulnerability with leadership. She's never claimed to have all the answers, but she opens doors through honesty. Her weight loss update in 2024 was just another layer of her truth. It showed that even icons need to regroup, recalibrate, and reclaim their peace. And she did so not with spectacle but with grace. The complexity of being a public figure, especially one navigating personal transformation under the public eye, can be overwhelming. But Jazz wears it like armor, not to deflect, but to protect what truly matters, which is her integrity, her values, and her joy. Every time she chooses to speak, to write, or to simply share a glimpse of her life, she invites the world into a deeper conversation. Not about her, but about what it means to live authentically in a world that often resists difference. Jazz's legacy, even at a young age, is built on more than visibility. It's grounded in growth. Her life tells a different story than the one some headlines try to write. And she's determined to stay focused on the story she's dishing and not the framing of the media. The polarized reactions to her journey say more about society than about Jazz herself. Those who criticize often miss the bigger picture. And those who support her? They don't just see a trans icon, they see a young woman choosing life, choosing purpose, and choosing to rise. As the world continues to evolve in its understanding of gender, identity, and justice, figures like Jazz Jennings have played a vital role in contributing to the versatile understanding of the current world. So, what's your take on Jazz Jennings's journey? Do you think her story changes how we see identity and perseverance in today's world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more contents like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.